Hello and welcome to Brave Little Buckaroo. I'm Tamsin and this is my special Vlogmas series How I Do Stuff, where each day I'm sharing a tip, technique or tutorial for how I do stuff. Earlier in the month, a viewer asked if I could talk about how to add borders to a quilt top if the pattern doesn't include them. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Now, as a longarm quilter, one of the biggest problems I come across is wavy borders. And the reason that borders get wavy is because they're not the right size to fit the quilt top. And then what happens is your quilt top is nice and square perhaps, but there's actually a lot of ripples and waves on the outside edge of the border. And that is called a wavy border. And the reason that happens is because it's not the right size. So today I'm going to show you how to make sure your borders are the right size for your quilt top. And it seemed impractical to try and show you that with an actual big quilt top. So I've made some diagrams and I will try to do like a voiceover as I show the diagrams on the screen. It's not a way I've made a video before, but we'll see how we go. I'll do my best. And then at the end, I'll also touch on how to add sashing to your quilt. So if you have a quilt with several blocks and you want to put borders in between those blocks, that's called sashing, and we'll talk about how to do that too. All right, I'll show you how I do it.
Okay, let's see if I can make this work. Let's imagine that we have a quilt top that is 40 by 50 inches and we want to put a border all the way around it that is 5 inches wide. So what we're going to do is start by measuring our quilt top, because even if the pattern says it should be 40 by 50 inches, it may not be. Everybody's quarter inch is slightly different, and if you've had a lot of seams across a lot of blocks to make that 40-inch quilt and you are slightly bigger or slightly smaller across all of those seams, it could be an inch or even more difference by the time you get to the end. So we'll start by measuring our quilt top across the top and across the sides to get the exact measurement of the quilt top. And since we know that our border wants to be 5 inches wide, the temptation is just to cut a bunch of 5-inch strips, sew them all together, and then just start sewing them across the top of the quilt. So you'd start at one end, sew across the top, and then cut the border piece when you get to the end, and then sew it across the bottom, and then cut it when you get to the end. But the problem with that is that as it's moving through the machine, either the quilt top or the border piece is going to get pulled or stretched or move through the machine slightly faster or slightly slower than the other piece, which is going to lead to wavy borders because your pieces of fabric aren't going to be the same size. So the way we deal with that is by cutting the border piece exactly to the size of the quilt top. So we'll start with our horizontal border and we're going to cut that to 40 inches by 5 inches. And we're going to pin the border piece to the quilt top. We want to start in the center, find the center of both pieces and pin them together, and then put pins at the ends as well. And then we're going to distribute the pins evenly throughout the center of those spaces. So pop a pin in at the quarter point, and then pop a pin in between each quarter point. And then that way you can be guaranteed that your border pieces are going to be evenly distributed across your quilt top, and they're going to wind up straight and square and exactly the same size. And since we're adding 2 border pieces and we're losing 1/2 inch seam allowance on both, we're going to end up losing 1 inch, but across the 2 pieces, gaining 9 inches. So our new size of our whole quilt top with the top and bottom border is now 40 by 59 inches. So now we'll add the vertical borders. So again, we're going to make sure the measurement of our quilt top is correct. So it should be 59 inches tall, but we're going to double check. And if it is 59 inches, then we're going to cut our vertical border pieces at 5 by 59 inches and we'll pin them the same way. Start in the center of both pieces, pin at each end, and then distribute the pins at the quarter points, at the 1/8 points, etc. in between, all the way along your quilt. And again, we'll be gaining 9 inches after we lose our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then the new size of our quilt top will be 49 by 59 inches. But then let's say we wanted to add another border. So we'll pop a 3-inch border on the outside of our 5-inch border. We'll go through the same process again. We'll measure our quilt, make sure that it is actually 49 inches wide, cut our border piece 49 inches by 3 inches, pin at the center, pin at the sides, distribute our pins evenly in between, top at bottom, and then sew. This time we'll be gaining 5 inches because our pieces that we started with were smaller, And the new size of our quilt top with our top and bottom borders will be 49 by 64. Again, we'll do the same with our vertical borders. We'll measure our quilt, make sure that it's accurate, and cut our pieces to 3 by 64 inches. Pin in the center, pin at the sides, and pin in between, and sew it on. And then the new size of our quilt top with both of our borders is 54 by 64 inches. And that's how you add borders to a quilt. It doesn't matter what size the center of your quilt is to start with. Just make sure you measure it accurately, cut your border pieces to be the right size, and then attach them evenly with pins. Now let's say you've got a quilt that is just quilt blocks, but you want to put some borders in between those blocks. So that's called sashing, and it looks like this. And basically we're going to treat each quilt block a little bit like a whole quilt top at first. We're going to add borders around the blocks and then sew the blocks together. So we'll start with vertical borders on these ones. And let's say our quilt blocks are 10 inches by 10 inches and our sashing is going to be 2 inches wide. So we'll cut a bunch of 10 inch by 2 inch strips, attach them to each vertical side of our quilt blocks, 2 on one end and then 1 on each other side, so that when you join them together there's one piece of sashing in between, as you can see here. And then we're going to measure that strip, and then we're going to cut our horizontal sashing to be the same size as what those strips are, the same as we did with our border pieces. So we'll cut a strip to go in between each row of blocks and at the top and at the bottom. Make sure they're exactly the same size as our strips, pin them, and then sew them to make sure they're square and even. And then we end up with a sashed quilt like this. And then if you wanted to go ahead and add borders to that as well, you would follow the same process as we already did.
And that's how I do it. I hope that was clear enough. Please do let me know if you have any questions about it. And as always, please remember that this is just how I do stuff. Anytime I'm showing you how I do something, it is just how I do it. It's not the only way or the best way or the way you should do it or the way you have to do it. It's just how I do it. So if you have a way that works for you and you get good results, keep using it. But if you haven't found a way, maybe try mine and see how you go. Hello friends, Editing Tamsin here. I just wanted to pop on and say that today is the 20th of December and there are technically 4 more days of Vlogmas left, but I only have 2 fully fledged ideas for proper tutorials for you. One is a sewing project and one is a cooking project. So I'm going to only go ahead and do those 2 rather than trying to half-ass a couple of somethings to go in between. I'm going to spend my time and attention on doing those 2 tutorials well, and those will be the ones that I'll get out to you, one on the 22nd and one on the 24th. So I will see you in a couple days. Love you. Okay friends, that's all I've got for you today. I hope you are happy and well and having a fantastic December. I love you. Bye.